What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpollia sitting on the couch, making some money investing in fractional real estate online, as usual. Today, I'm talking about Mogul's latest long-term rental, The Grant. This isn't live on their site yet. It's one that we got through email. People posted the link in Discord. If you didn't receive the link through email, it appears to be another property that was part of the long-term rental portfolio that Mogul mentioned on the webinar. It's very similar the way the property looks, like it's two duplexes on one lot, so it's very similar to the Petty in that regard. I'm going to do this video a little bit different than the other two, or I'm going to just kind of compare and contrast for the other ones, because I just put out a video about the Petty a few days ago and about the Buffett a few days before that, which the Buffett was this other one. In that package, it was larger. It's all three of these properties were 4 units of 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, but the Buffett was the largest of all of them and also had the highest in-place income with $81,000, and it was the highest asking price at $635. When I did the video for the Petty, I compared the price per square foot and the rent to price ratios to sort of give you an idea of how these deals stacked up, and it looks like the Grant is much more similar to the Petty. They both have $75,000 is their year one income, which they're saying is below the T12 underwriting. Yeah. So they're both $602,000. It's the virtually identical square footage. I think they're actually not exactly, like they're four square feet different. So it looks like the same deal from a lot of perspectives, but it's different in a few. So a couple of things. One, in this one they mentioned the appraisal's already come back, and it appraised for $18,000 over the sale price. We don't know. We didn't get any sort of note like that on the Petty. It may just be that appraisal wasn't done yet when they put the listing up, or it may be that they didn't appraise at the same prices. But that seems like that would be pretty odd to me, because they seem like very, they're very similar properties. So it would be surprising to me if they didn't appraise at, very, very close prices. So that's a good sign. I think it's a good sign for this whole portfolio. We talked a lot about valuation in both of the other videos. And when I looked it up on Zillow, Zillow just has a really hard time with these multifamily properties. Like you can see, this is one of the listings. It thought it was just 1/4 of the property, right? At 2 bed, 2 bath, 900 square feet. But thinks it's a single family home of that size. And so that's how it gets to this, $263,000. Someone in the Discord had mentioned, hey, it thinks that each unit is worth this much. And I don't think that's an accurate way to look at this, because typically, if it's valuing it as a single family home, it's not the same as looking at each unit in a multifamily property. So I think, the Zillow valuation was basically worthless for this one. Realtor.com didn't even, it had a last sold, but it looks like that might have only been, it's confusing because it's half the square footage, but it's all the beds and baths. So I'm not even sure what happened there. I do think it was the whole property. I don't think it was half, but I don't know that for sure, especially because the picture being offset kind of makes it look like that. So in any case, it seems like from a valuation perspective, we're doing pretty well here. This is, 7.41 is what their predicted cash yield is. If you look at the Petty, it was 7.37, virtually identical. I think when you're making projections into the future, when you're, over to the second decimal place in your percentages, it doesn't take a whole lot of difference to get you there. And then let's see, what was the Buffett was right around there too. The Buffett was even a little bit lower, right? Honestly, though, out of all of these properties, I like the Buffett the best. I think that I just, one, where it was situated, that it was a fourplex versus two duplexes on one lot. Sometimes that just, I think most of the time you're not going to have a financing problem with that, but every once in a while you'll run into a lender that will give you some sort of problem with it. And so, it just can get a little bit complicated sometimes when you're insuring it. I've seen people accidentally only insure one of their buildings and stuff like that. When there are certain things, you do have some economies of scale having all the units under one roof, for example, versus having to replace two roofs. There's all these different reasons where I actually prefer the full fourplex over these two duplexes. But probably the biggest thing I liked about it though is actually having the garages, right? And then it's a bit larger, because I'm a big believer in, the more space you give your tenants to store stuff, the less likely they are to move. I don't have any research to share with you on that, but that has been my anecdotal experience over time. Like if adding a shed, having a garage, all these things, if you have a semi-finished attic where that's just for storage, all those things seem to lend themselves to longer term tenancies. This is one thing though that we see different here. So in the Buffett and in the Petty, they mentioned 4.5 years and 5-year average tenancy. They didn't tell us anything about that. They did say that they have some leases in place through next year. But didn't say, okay, what the average, what the average stay of their tenants are here. So my guess is, because we saw it in the other two and didn't see it here, it's probably a little bit worse here. I don't know that for sure. I don't necessarily think that's the biggest deal, because it could just be idiosyncratic to those specific tenants that they had moved out, and you got new ones. Before I forget, please like and subscribe. In the description of this video, I have links to all the places where I'm currently investing in fractional real estate online. Please feel free to use all those links, but do your own due diligence on the terms that they're providing. When they're saying they're giving you some free money, you want to make sure that you're actually doing all the things that are required to get that. But also, too, just do your own due diligence on those platforms and any properties you see me talking about. Just because I'm investing in these doesn't mean that you should. It is, I have a different risk tolerance than you, a different timeline looking at things, for all different reasons. Just it's me buying these doesn't mean that you should. You want to do your own due diligence. Also, in the description of this video, I have a link to the Discord that I set up, where we've got somewhere around 240, 250 members now. It's free to join. It's not a sales funnel. I will never contact you to try to sell you something, although you might get some fake DMs from someone who looks like me. Please report those if that happens. But it's just a place where a whole bunch of us can talk about all the different fractional real estate investing platforms. We share some due diligence. The Mogul thread is always great. There's always, Ike and Brad are probably the two most diligent posters in there. Almost every property you'll see something from one of those two at least. But there's been a lot more activity in there as well. A lot of questions. So I just want to encourage you to keep doing that. Okay, what else is different about this property? So far, they didn't mention the length of the tenants. I don't think that's a huge deal. They mentioned that this one is already appraised, and it appraised for $18,000 more than we have it under contract for. I think that's fantastic. I couldn't really come up with any good comps other than the ones that we already have. I did want to point out this is significantly further away from the other two than they are to each other. So this is the Buffett here. This is the Petty. And so this is the, what are we talking about today? This is the Grant. I never really, the Buffett, they said who that was supposed to be. I never really know who they're talking about. But so you can see, okay, maybe these shouldn't be priced exactly like these. It's far enough away that it could be a little bit different. But I don't know this market. And like I said, we already have an appraisal. They have in-place income. The crime map this is one of the best crime maps I've seen on anything, because this goes 6 months back, and this is how many crimes there are. So I was shocked at how good this looked. It actually made me worry that there's a reporting problem with spot crime, because we hardly ever see such sparse crime on one of these crime maps. But so that's a great thing. The other thing that was a big issue for me, and why this is one that I would not invest in, is the flood map, right? And this is why we have to look at all these things. I think there's definitely a tendency to get complacent, like especially when you're buying multiple properties in a portfolio and they're very similar. A lot of times I've seen people like just kind of slack off. They're like, oh, well, it's not very far away, right? I mean, this whole thing it's 10 miles away. It doesn't, it looks very similar on the map, but well, look at this. I mean, we are in an AE flood zone, and I have been willing to get into some of the shaded X zone, but the AE for me just seems like, those are, it's this special flood hazard area. Wait a minute, is that what it is? The AE, yeah, I think that, and so obviously, just because I think that's a problem, it doesn't mean that you can't invest in it, right? Like you want to dig into, well, what does that really mean? I'm fairly certain that they're going to have flood insurance on this one, which we didn't have to on the others. I am always, I do think that the Mogul guys are savvy when it comes to insurance. They seem to be on top of that. If there is a flood claim, I'm sure they are, and this is, again, my opinion of them, right? But I've come to trust their business savvy in general. The way they're handling the title insurance claim on the WAGs, I think, gives us some clue as to how things will go. And, if that gets wrapped up in the next couple of months, I'll have even more confidence in them, right? If it works out the way that they've projected it to. But so, maybe with insurance in place, and it's got to be baked into their numbers that they're paying that insurance, I would think. And that's one of the reasons that I would sometimes like them to give us a little bit more. Okay, so we just have a homeowner's insurance number. Let's compare that to the homeowner's insurance of the petty. Let's see, we're going to have to go on to the analysis, because those two properties are the same price. Yeah, see, that's a little bit worrisome, right? Do they have some other cost where maybe they're not putting it under homeowners? No, it doesn't look like it. So that's surprising to me. Am I misremembering? Was this one in a flood zone too, and I don't remember it? Let's take a look. I don't think that it was, but I could certainly be wrong. But it seems like to have the same line item cost for insurance. Yeah, no, this one was not. And now what about the Buffett? Was the Buffett in a flood zone? And what does that insurance number look like? So that could be a problem with their projections if they haven't baked that in. Because I think I'm fairly certain they're going to want to have that. So I'm curious. Yeah, and this was the Buffett, and again, it's not in one of the, it's not in a flood zone. It's just regular zone X. And what was the Buffett's projected homeowners insurance? It's actually higher. And it seems like more. It's the percent that it's higher is more so. It's a larger property, right? So it. I think that's taking into account the fact that the replacement amount. You're building a larger property. It didn't cost that much more, but it is a decent amount more square footage. So I guess that makes sense. So yeah, that really worries me that's not picking up. That there's not some other line item, because I typically I guess I'd have to. I wonder if they're getting flood insurance for all of them. That seems like that would be unlikely that it would be the same price. I don't know. That's a question that if I were going to buy this one, I would ask them. I just typically have a blanket policy of I just don't buy in those in the zones other than the X and like I have bent my rules a little bit and bought some of the shaded X properties that Mogul's put out. I've bought a couple of shaded X properties on some of the other platforms as well. But, going into the AE or some of these other zones, I'm just not willing to do that. And, that's I think sometimes it just makes it easy to create sort of these policies for yourself that you stick to. And, that way you don't have to weigh each and everything every single time, right? If you just have a hard and fast rule, helps you roll things out. And I think we've talked about this lots of times, but I'd much more rather just accidentally get rid, not buy a deal that could have been a good deal than to buy one that is a bad one, right? So, one other thing I wanted to point out, this is also on what seems to be a fairly main road. Oftentimes the busier the road, the more turnover that you'll get because tenants don't necessarily like to, although this one, it does seem like it is one way here. It maybe not too terrible, but that's one of the things I always look at. I'd rather be in the subdivision, not on the main road. And this one looks like it's a little bit more of a main road than the other ones we were on. The other thing too is, they mentioned, okay, the bus stop is right here, which I think it's like right in front of the home. And I do like to be close to a bus stop, but I don't necessarily want it directly on my property. Like there's not a bench or anything, but you might end up having people just hanging out here because this is the nearest bus stop. And, so sometimes that makes people that live in this home a little bit uncomfortable. That's really, though, the only stuff that I think makes the grant significantly different from the petty. Obviously it doesn't have the connector. I didn't look this one up in the county records. This is, I've mentioned a few times lately, I'm just trying to get something out for these pretty quickly before they sell out. And especially on the ones that I'm passing on for some reason, like the flood issue. I'm not continuing to dig in, but if you have questions about it that you think I might be helpful to answer, please feel free to put those in the comments, jump in the Discord and talk about it. If you're planning to buy this one anyway, I'm curious to hear, why, what's getting you over the hump. Because in my mind, this deal, on the surface, it doesn't look any better than the petty, right? Like the numbers are exactly the same, but it seems to me that the risk profile is higher because of the existence of the flood zone. And it, I don't know. I mean, the petty, I did, mention that I don't love that the land around it isn't developed yet and whatnot, but I think this is a much bigger issue than that. So, we're not getting some, I guess some of the risk is taken out of this one because we know it's already appraised and we know that it appraised for more. So I like that, but yeah, I think that otherwise, and then some people were talking about, do I want to buy some of all of these or not? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I've mentioned several times that one of the biggest benefits to fractional real estate is the ability to diversify. If you have so much capital that you're putting a big chunk into every single one, I can see that being, that's a way to get very wide diversification. But if you don't, and you're being somewhat selective, in my mind, it makes more sense to diversify, geographically, right? Instead of buying, this is basically buying the same deal 3 times if you buy all 3. Now, obviously, as we talked about them, they do have slightly different risk profiles. There's things, pros and cons to each. But in general, I'd rather have one of these here and then wait for a long-term rental in another market if I'm not going to just be deploying a ton of capital where I'm buying some of all of it. And then as I've talked about before, on Mogul specifically, I'm trying to buy with a little bit bigger chunks of capital. I mixed cash and capital there, if you're wondering why that sounded so weird. But I'm using bigger chunks than I am on some of the other platforms because you get a K1 for each one. And it is a little bit more cumbersome from a tax perspective to deal with a whole bunch of different forms versus just getting one consolidated one that you get on some of the other platforms. So, you know, that's part of it. And, you know, with that being said, I think I own 18 properties on here already, and, you know, do plan to keep buying more, but it's something that I'm keeping in mind, right? I'm not buying these little $500 slices anymore. I'm doing all 2,500. I think that's a big enough number to make it worth it to deal with the forms, but that's just for me, right? And that's with what I think I'm going to get charged by my accountant when I hand him a pile of these. And I'm not 100% sure because I only had one last year from Mogul. So, you know, still new to this, still experimenting with these platforms. And that's something I just I've wanted to stress that more lately, because I have seen some people that are putting an unbelievable amount of capital on some of these platforms, buying into things with very little due diligence. And that it just scares me, right? Like, I think that I want to take a really measured approach to all the platforms, to all the properties. I'm just not in a hurry to deploy a ton of capital into something that is really still a new asset class. As much as I love all of the benefits of fractional real estate, I'm sure there are some unknown unknowns right now, right? There are some problems we're going to run into in the future in this asset class that we haven't even thought of yet. You know, that's always going to happen when you have new products and new industries. Now, obviously, you know, depending on how much experience you have in the space, it doesn't have to be like, you know, if you, from Lofty's perspective, they've run into tons of these issues that just they couldn't have foreseen. And you've heard me say over and over again, like, I think just a little bit of experience in the space would have made it easy to avoid a lot of those problems. But I still believe that we are going to see even people that, you know, have a lot of real estate investing experience. I believe there could be issues that we run into in this space that we're not expecting, right? And so that's why I'm still moving slowly. I'm spreading my capital across a bunch of platforms. I am constantly trying to revisit, like, okay, I really like Mogul. I think those guys know what they're doing. But every single time they put out a deal, I want to really look at it critically. Like, am I starting to trust them too much, right? And I think that there was a short period of time where maybe I was. And then they put out some deals that really made me question, and now I'm taking a little bit harder look. So anyway, that's, I don't know, I'm just getting sort of preachy, so sorry about that, as far as like the way I think that you should go about doing this. But that's just what I'm doing. I think that the more that we're all critical of it, the better the industry will be, right? Because it'll force all the fractional real estate investment providers and platforms to do a better job. Which reminds me, I do have a Lofty video I'm working on. They're starting to turn the corner on a lot of little things, and so I think that it's going to be worth talking about and looking at. And also, though, you know, I just want to make sure we're not getting too optimistic about it, because a lot of the changes are really just like visual, right? Like, are the way the user interface, the way we interact with the platform, and not necessarily fundamental changes in the way things are working. Anyway, though, that's going to be a video for another day. I'm just going to stop now. I don't know what it is. I've been really blabby lately. So until next time, I'm going to just keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.